Stop for a brief moment because what you are about to hear may completely transform the way you understand your connection with this person. There are moments in life when everything seems completely quiet on the outside. Yet somewhere beneath the surface, a decision has already been made. One so meaningful and powerful that it has the ability to change two lives forever. The strange thing is that most people never recognize these moments while they are taking place. They wait for obvious signs, dramatic messages, or undeniable proof, without realizing that the deepest transformations almost always begin in silence. What if right now, the person you cannot seem to stop thinking about has reached an important turning point? What if the questions that have kept them awake at night have finally begun to receive answers? What if the walls created by fear, pride, doubt, and uncertainty have started to weaken, creating space for a truth they can no longer continue avoiding? This is not about fantasy, or simply wishing for something to happen. It is about the hidden changes that take place within the human soul before any physical action becomes visible. The biggest decisions are rarely made in front of an audience. They happen in quiet moments, in private thoughts, and in those unseen places where nobody else is watching. Stay with me until the very end, because what you are about to discover may help you understand why everything could soon begin changing in ways you never expected. There are moments in life when everything looks exactly the same on the surface. Yet beneath that peaceful exterior, an invisible transformation may have already started. Most people expect life-changing decisions to appear through dramatic announcements, obvious signs, or sudden actions. But the reality is that the most powerful choices are often made long before anyone around us can recognize them. They are created in silence, inside private thoughts, during sleepless nights, and through the hidden conversations a person repeatedly has with themselves. If your soulmate has recently reached what feels like the biggest decision of their life, it is possible that this decision did not suddenly appear in one single moment. It may have been quietly developing for weeks, months, or perhaps even years. Human beings often spend much of their lives trying to escape difficult truths. They fill their schedules with routines, responsibilities, distractions, and temporary forms of comfort. Yet eventually, there comes a point when the inner world refuses to remain ignored. What was once pushed away begins demanding attention, feelings that were buried begin rising toward the surface, questions that were avoided return with even greater intensity. In these moments, a person begins confronting parts of themselves that they can no longer run away from. This process is usually invisible to everyone else because it takes place deep within the psyche. To the outside world, they may appear completely unchanged. They may continue living their normal routine, saying the same things, going to the same places, and following the same familiar habits. But internally, something powerful may be shifting. The soul has a remarkable way of moving a person toward authenticity. When someone has spent a long time living in conflict with what they truly feel, an increasing sense of discomfort often begins to appear. The life they once accepted without question may suddenly stop feeling fulfilling. The explanations they once trusted may no longer provide the same sense of peace. Slowly, a deeper awareness begins to emerge, showing them what truly matters. This awareness is rarely loud. It does not usually force itself into existence overnight. Instead, it gradually dissolves old illusions and exposes deeper truths that were already present beneath the surface. The person begins recognizing what they genuinely value, what they may have lost, what they still deeply care about, and what they can no longer continue pretending is unimportant. This invisible shift can feel confusing because it challenges old beliefs, familiar habits and patterns that have existed for a long time. The individual may resist it in the beginning. Fear may tell them to stay exactly where they are. Pride may convince them that they should ignore their emotions. Logic may provide endless reasons for avoiding change. Their mind may build one explanation after another in an attempt to maintain control. Yet the deeper part of themselves continues speaking. It appears through intuition, repeated thoughts, meaningful memories, unexpected emotional reactions, and that persistent inner feeling that something important needs to be acknowledged. At first, they may dismiss these signs as coincidence. They may tell themselves that they are simply remembering the past or experiencing a temporary emotional moment. But as the same feelings continue returning, the inner voice becomes increasingly difficult to silence. It keeps bringing them back to the same truth. Long before physical actions take place in the outside world, a decision is often made inside this hidden emotional realm. It is the moment when a person finally stops running away from the truth and begins accepting what their heart has known for a long time. Even if nothing appears visibly different yet, the direction of their life may have already changed. The seed of transformation has been planted. And once that seed exists, the future cannot remain exactly as it was before. There comes a point in every emotional journey when the heart becomes tired of carrying powerful feelings in complete silence. For a long time, people can convince themselves that distance is enough to erase affection, that distractions will replace meaningful connections, or that time alone will weaken emotions that once felt impossible to control. They create explanations that sound reasonable. They build emotional walls that appear strong. They tell themselves they have moved forward, that they no longer care, or that whatever they once felt belongs entirely to the past. Yet emotions that are deeply rooted rarely disappear simply because someone refuses to acknowledge them. They remain beneath the surface, waiting for the moment when they can no longer be denied. Fear has an enormous influence over human behavior. It encourages people to protect themselves from disappointment, rejection, vulnerability, embarrassment, and uncertainty. Instead of expressing what they genuinely feel, they may hide behind silence, distance, indifference, or carefully controlled behavior. Pride can strengthen this pattern by making them believe that showing love would make them weak, or that admitting their emotions would place them in a vulnerable position. Together, fear and pride create an invisible barrier that keeps genuine emotions trapped inside. From the outside, everything may appear calm and controlled, but internally there can be an exhausting struggle between what the mind demands and what the heart continues quietly saying. The heart, however, has a persistence that cannot always be explained by logic. It remembers moments that carried genuine meaning. It holds on to experiences that touched something deeper than ordinary attraction. It recognizes connections that changed the way a person understood themselves and the world around them. These memories are not merely stored as ordinary thoughts. They can become part of a person's emotional identity. This is why certain people remain unforgettable even after long periods of separation. The emotional connection continues to exist because it was never based entirely on circumstances. At some point, it became part of the person's inner landscape. It became connected to memories, emotions, hopes, fears, and possibilities that are difficult to simply erase. Long continues moving forward, maintaining emotional resistance can become increasingly exhausting. The effort required to suppress authentic feelings begins consuming a person's emotional energy. They may notice recurring dreams, unexpected memories, familiar songs bringing back old emotions, certain places suddenly reminding them of someone, or an unexplained sense that something important remains unfinished. Sometimes even the smallest reminder can reopen a feeling they believed they had completely overcome. These experiences gradually weaken the walls that fear and pride created. The heart does not usually fight the mind through force. Instead, it patiently reveals the truth through repeated reminders that refuse to completely disappear. The same memory returns. The same question appears again. The same emotional reaction quietly resurfaces. Eventually, there can be a quiet moment of realization. It may happen while the person is completely alone, during an ordinary afternoon, late at night, while driving, listening to a particular song, looking through an old message, or witnessing something that unexpectedly awakens emotions they thought had already disappeared. In that moment, the excuses begin losing their strength. The stories created to avoid vulnerability start collapsing. What once seemed impossible to admit suddenly becomes impossible to deny. The person realizes that their deepest emotions have remained alive despite every attempt to suppress them. They begin understanding that pretending no longer creates peace. Avoiding the truth does not remove it, and resisting what feels genuine only creates a deeper internal conflict. This realization is not necessarily caused by impulse. In many cases, it comes from finally accepting that authentic feelings have survived every test of time, distance, uncertainty, disappointment, and self-protection. They have survived the periods when the person tried to move forward. They have survived the moments when they convinced themselves that they were completely over it. And they have survived the silence that was supposed to make everything easier. Slowly, the person begins seeing that something inside them has remained unchanged. This does not automatically mean they will act immediately. It does not guarantee a particular outcome, but it can reveal an important internal truth that can no longer remain hidden within the deepest part of the heart. Distance is often misunderstood as the end of a connection when, in reality, it can sometimes reveal its true emotional depth. When two people are constantly present in each other's lives, emotions can become mixed with routine, expectations, misunderstandings, responsibilities, and everyday distractions. Daily interaction can sometimes hide what is genuinely meaningful because the mind becomes accustomed to whatever it sees repeatedly. Familiarity can make something extraordinary feel ordinary. A person may not fully recognize the importance of another person's presence until that presence is no longer guaranteed. When the noise disappears, the emotional truth can become much easier to hear. This is why separation can create an unexpected kind of clarity. Without constant interaction, a person has more space to observe what they actually feel. There is no immediate conversation to distract them, no routine interaction to fill the emotional space, and no familiar presence to temporarily quiet the questions inside their mind. Instead, they are left alone with their thoughts. At first, they may believe this distance is helping them forget. They may even feel relieved. But as the days pass, certain memories can become stronger rather than weaker. They may begin noticing how often their thoughts return to the same person without conscious effort. They may remember conversations they once dismissed. They may realize that certain moments carried far more emotional weight than they understood at the time. Sometimes clarity arrives because absence exposes what presence concealed. When someone is no longer available in the same way, the mind begins comparing life before the separation with life afterward. They may notice what feels missing. They may discover that certain experiences do not feel the same anymore. They may encounter other people and realize that the emotional connection they experienced before cannot easily be reproduced. This does not mean every memory is a sign or every feeling guarantees a reunion. It means that distance can create the psychological space necessary for honest reflection. A person who was once focused on surviving the moment can finally step back and ask themselves what they actually want. And this is where a major internal decision can begin forming. The person may start asking questions they previously avoided. What am I really afraid of? Why did I create this distance? Why do I still think about this person? What would happen if I stopped pretending that I do not care? What if the connection mattered more than I allowed myself to admit? These questions can be uncomfortable, but they can also become deeply transformative. Because once someone starts asking themselves honest questions, it becomes much harder to continue living according to an old story that no longer feels true. The decision may therefore happen quietly before it ever becomes visible. They may not send a message immediately. They may not make a dramatic confession. They may not suddenly appear at your door or announce everything they have been feeling. Instead, the first change may happen entirely within them. Their resistance begins weakening. Their understanding becomes clearer. Their priorities begin shifting. The possibility they once rejected may no longer seem impossible. The person who previously needed certainty may begin accepting that some truths are understood emotionally before they can be explained logically. If you have been experiencing uncertainty, silence, or emotional distance, remember that silence does not always tell the complete story. Sometimes silence is simply the space where someone is processing emotions they have not yet learned how to express. Sometimes people need to confront themselves before they can honestly approach another person. They may need to understand their own fears, take responsibility for their past choices, and recognize what they truly want before they can take meaningful action. The external world may appear completely still while the internal world is undergoing a profound transformation, so do not assume that nothing is happening simply because you cannot see it. Some of the most important changes in human relationships begin long before they become visible. A person can spend weeks thinking, remembering, questioning, and emotionally reorganizing themselves before taking one single outward step. And when that step finally happens, it may appear sudden to everyone else. But to the person experiencing it, the decision may have been forming for a very long time. Perhaps this is why certain connections remain difficult to explain. They continue occupying a meaningful place within the heart even after circumstances have changed. They survive periods of silence, distance, confusion, and uncertainty. They remain present not because someone is incapable of moving forward, but because some emotional experiences leave a deeper impression than others. They become part of a person's story, and sometimes understanding that story requires time. The most important thing is not to force an outcome or attempt to control another person's choices. True emotional transformation cannot be forced from the outside. It has to develop within the individual. What you can recognize is the possibility that beneath visible silence, there may be an internal process taking place that you cannot yet see. A decision can begin as a thought, become a realization, develop into acceptance, and eventually turn into action. But each stage requires its own time. So if something inside you has been telling you that this connection still carries meaning, do not immediately dismiss that feeling. At the same time, do not build your entire life around an assumption. Continue growing, continue living, continue becoming stronger within yourself. Let clarity come naturally rather than chasing it, because sometimes the greatest shift occurs when you stop trying to force an answer and allow the truth to reveal itself through time, consistency, and genuine action. And perhaps the most surprising part of all is this. The person you have been thinking about may also be experiencing their own private battle between what they have tried to believe and what they continue to feel. You may not see that struggle, You may never know how many conversations they have had with themselves. You may not know how many times they have questioned their own decisions. But if their inner world has reached the point where avoidance is no longer providing peace, then something meaningful has already changed. The outside world may still look exactly the same. There may still be silence. There may still be distance. There may still be unanswered questions. But internally, the story may already be moving in a different direction. And sometimes the biggest change in a relationship begins not with a message, not with a reunion, and not with a dramatic declaration, but with one quiet realization inside a person's heart. I can no longer pretend that this does not matter to me. That realization can become the beginning of everything that follows. It is only when that presence is gone that the heart begins to realize what has been missing all this time. Separation creates distance, and within that distance, clarity slowly starts to appear. Many people believe that walking away from someone will automatically remove emotional attachment. They assume that new routines, demanding schedules, and the simple passing of time will eventually replace what once felt deeply important. In the beginning, this idea may appear believable. Life moves forward, responsibilities continue, and the outside world never stops. Yet underneath that surface, something completely different can begin to happen. Without the constant noise of daily interaction, the mind becomes quieter, creating room for deeper emotions to rise into awareness. Memories that once appeared simple or insignificant suddenly begin carrying a much greater meaning. Conversations replay inside the mind with a new perspective. Moments that were previously ignored start revealing feelings that had been hidden beneath them. Distance also removes many of the illusions created during emotional conflict. Pride begins losing its influence when there is no one nearby to impress, challenge, or resist. Arguments no longer occupy the center of attention, and temporary frustrations slowly lose their intensity. What remains are the deeper questions that cannot easily be avoided. Was that connection truly important? Was that person merely part of a chapter that was meant to end? Or were they someone who awakened a part of the self that nobody else had ever been able to reach? These questions often appear not because a person deliberately chooses to think about them, but because silence naturally creates an opportunity for honest reflection. The absence of someone meaningful has a powerful way of exposing emotional patterns that once remained invisible. A person may suddenly notice themselves wanting to share exciting news, searching for comfort during difficult moments, or remembering how deeply understood they once felt in the presence of someone special. These reactions often happen naturally, without preparation or conscious intention. They reveal that certain emotional bonds extend far beyond simple convenience or physical attraction. Over time, they become woven into the ordinary rhythm of everyday existence, making their absence much harder to ignore. As this awareness becomes stronger, people often begin examining their past behavior from a completely different point of view. They remember the moments when fear caused them to stay quiet, when pride prevented an honest conversation, or when assumptions took the place of genuine understanding. Things that once seemed completely reasonable may suddenly look like missed opportunities. This new clarity is not simply meant to create regret. Instead, it can awaken a deeper form of emotional maturity. It encourages a person to understand themselves more honestly and recognize the genuine value of something they may have previously taken for granted. Distance, although painful, can become a quiet teacher. It removes ordinary distractions, weakens emotional defenses, and creates space for an honest encounter with the truth underneath everyday life. Within that silence, the heart receives the freedom to recognize what constant activity had previously hidden. A person may finally begin to understand which connections were temporary and which ones had become a lasting part of their inner world, connections that cannot easily be replaced or forgotten. Many people believe that love by itself is enough to bring two individuals together, but a meaningful connection requires something much deeper than temporary emotion. Affection can create attraction, and longing can create hope, but lasting relationships require personal growth, emotional awareness, and inner transformation. Two people can genuinely care for each other and still struggle to stay together when they continue carrying the same fears, insecurities, and unresolved emotional wounds that originally created separation. This is exactly why periods of distance can sometimes hold far more meaning than they appear to have. They are not simply empty pauses in the story. They can become opportunities for profound personal development, preparing each individual for a completely different kind of future. Transformation rarely takes place inside a comfortable environment. When everything feels familiar, people naturally repeat the same patterns without stopping to question them. They respond in predictable ways, make choices based on old habits, and protect themselves through emotional defenses that were created many years earlier. These patterns can remain unnoticed for a very long time because there is little pressure to challenge them. It is often only when an important connection changes, weakens, or disappears that the inner world begins asking difficult questions. The sudden loss of certainty forces a person to examine themselves with a level of honesty they may never have experienced before. During those quiet periods of reflection, people often start recognizing behaviors they once considered completely normal. They may discover that they avoided vulnerability because they were deeply afraid of rejection. They may realize that pride prevented sincere communication, or that unresolved emotional pain caused them to push away the very person and connection they secretly wanted most. These realizations are rarely comfortable. They require humility, patience, courage, and a willingness to accept that some of life's biggest obstacles were not outside of them at all, but living within. Although this understanding can hurt, it can also become the genuine beginning of change. As self-awareness develops, personal priorities naturally begin changing as well. Things that once seemed extremely important slowly lose their control over everyday life. The constant desire to prove oneself, win every disagreement, or appear completely unaffected begins fading away,